Hello. Wow. I am incredibly honored to be sharing the stage with the people I've seen so far today. Hi, I'm Erika Hall, and I'm the co-founder of Mule Design, as you heard. So when John wrote to me and told me the theme, I was so excited. Like, yeah, I'm right there. Mule, we've got that. We've been doing that. I know that hybrid vigor. And you see here, this is my dog, Rupert. He is on theme. He is half pug, half chihuahua. He's a chug. It's true. It's true. And he's an incredibly important part of my design process. He goes to work with me every day. He's a good dog. That was my test to make sure that my slides were actually working. And I won't be talking specifically about much of our project work, but I will talk to you about the thread that runs through it all that really has to do with my background. So a designer's job is to bring new things into the world. It's an amazing, great job. And we hope good things. And we hope these things are all examples of good design. But this leads to the question, what is good? How do you know it's good? Is it just good for you? Is it good for a business? Is it good for the world? Is there such a thing as objectively good design? And this might sound like a really academic question, like the thing that you talk about at a conference, over drinks, after seeing a new project launch. But I think it's an incredibly important question because the first rule of design is that everything follows from the goal. And so without a goal, without a good goal, I don't think it's possible to do good design. And in our world, our increasingly quantified digital world, it's really popular. You know, I'm out in San Francisco, and it's so popular to talk about optimizing things, to reach that highest peak. Because we can look at the numbers, and we can count, and we can tweak, and we can obsess. But I always ask, optimize for what? What are we optimizing for? You know, the system won't tell us. The design won't tell us what our objective should be. First, we have to decide what's good. And so there was once this Scotsman who thought quite a lot about how we decide what we ought to do. You know, this is way back in the 1700s, middle of the 18th century. This is David Hume in his fancy hat. And he noticed a tendency that thinkers had to make claims about what you ought to do, what good you ought to pursue, based on what is. You know, they'd make this leap. And I know we're supposed to be bringing you new ideas, so I apologize. I'm bringing you something 300 years old, but I think it's really, really important. Because you can't just describe the world and from that derive what you should be doing. You know, one example of this is known as the naturalistic fallacy. X is natural, therefore X is good. You know, you see this a lot at Whole Foods. Like, oh, other animals don't cook their food. That seems natural. I won't cook my food. But, you know, cooking food is actually one of the things that contributed to our large brains, and it's really good for us. Plenty of things that aren't natural are quite good. You look at an artificial heart, that's a good thing. Most people would agree that that's very good because it comes from the principle that preserving life and health is a good thing. And you need to add that ethical principle, or you need to add some assumptions to figure out what you should do with what you've learned about the world. But the problem with value judgments and with assumptions is that they're up for debate. Here's another example of an is-ought problem in product design. You know, getting around a city is very challenging. We ought to invent an entirely new form of personal transportation. And this is sort of the is-ought leap that the makers of the Segway made. You know, had a fantastic innovative design and great technology, but it was not a commercial success because there were some other assumptions they didn't examine in here. But then we saw the Copenhagen wheel that had a much different way to proceed from this observation about the way the world is. And so fundamentally, design is a series of decisions. And making decisions is very hard. We do have to make some. We do have to commit to a certain extent to a path. I agree with the synthesis. But a lot of times, to make progress, we have to make a decision. And I think this anxiety is behind so much of what we call data-driven design. Because we hope that by looking at the data, we won't have to make that judgment call. We can just say, oh, I saw it in the numbers. And that'll tell us what we should do. This right here is the is-ought problem. It's called Hume's law or Hume's guillotine if you're feeling a little stabby. So the gap between what currently exists and what you're aiming for, that's where design happens. Design is exactly the process of observing the world and looking and having a vision for what the world should be. And often reconciling the differences between what different people need that world to be along the way. And when we're done with the design process, no matter how small, the world is different. And we hope better because we hope we've chosen the good. And we have seen many people talk about this, about a world with easier biking, a world with more justice, a world with drink robots. We've heard many fantastic examples of moving from this current state to some much better state through the power of design. And so what this means is that designers must also be philosophers. Design requires both considering very clearly the world as it is and considering and having a strong point of view on the world as it ought to be, and then making a plan to get there. A philosopher is somebody who strives for a systematic expertise at the nature of reality. And it seems to me that this expertise it's a prerequisite for doing design. I think I'm stealing from Bertrand Russell, a great British philosopher. I actually listen to the history of philosophy while I run. There's another hybrid activity I do. I really feel like I'm maximizing, like it's true. I listen to this pleasant British reader talking about Kant, and I'm like, oh, I'm running along. I feel very integrated in that moment. So design is in the gap between science and speculation. We start with what we know, and then we think, well, what might possibly be? And that's exactly the place where design is. From the unknowable future that we're trying to get to from what we know now. And we think about how various solutions might bring us closer. The handy thing about being a hybrid designer and philosopher is that the uniform is the same. This is my casual Friday. And it's also handy. It works if you're going to be James Bond, too. So for me, studying philosophy was this beautiful accident with really, really practical results. So no philosophers showed up on career day at my high school. I wonder why. I really wanted to be an architect, and I used to make house plans, like little layouts on my Etch-a-Sketch. I even got the door curves right and everything. But then I had this really sadistic English teacher who made us all read The Fountainhead. I don't know if you've had to read that, but then I was done. And then I thought, Supreme Court Justice. That sounds like an awesome career. I went to Taft High, and I thought, he wanted to be a Supreme Court Justice. That's a cool job where you get to consider the world and make really, really important discernments. But then I realized that I had just as much chance of being a professional basketball player as a Supreme Court Justice. And so that same teacher had this great parlor game. He'd look around the classroom, and he would discern what our career would be. He'd look at somebody and say, teacher, writer, actor, lawyer. And he got to me. And he said, I don't know. I can't tell what you're going to do. So I said, okay, well, I guess I'll study liberal arts. And I think the reason he couldn't was because at that point, the internet was barely a thing that people knew about. It was still an NSF project. And the web hadn't even hadn't even come into existence yet. And so I went off and I studied philosophy, and I had the good luck to be in this great department with a lot of really excellent, strong women professors, and I had great role models. And I learned some really fantastic tools. I learned to really keep my inquiry sharp. And unlike what Fred said, I actually use my degree every single day, because it turns out that philosophy and the internet are a very, very important match. And so I'm a designer. At least that's what I put in my passport application, so it must be true. But I'm a designer with no obvious craft. My craft is my critique. My craft is building a case, building an argument, imagining a world of abstract concepts. And so I work with a team that's actually very, very good at the craft part of it, because you really need the two together. But the craft, I don't think, is sufficient without that framework. A colleague of mine, Thomas Wendt, wrote a fantastic book using the philosophy of Heidegger to talk about experience design. And he said we make an excellent job of developing products, but a terrible job of designing them, because he too was concerned that people defined design purely as craft. This is a real lowest common denominator, I think, way of looking at it. But it has a pull when we just think, oh, am I just good enough at the craft? And fortunately, there have been some great advances, design thinking in businesses. RISD actually has a philosophy department as well as being a design school. But I even talked to designers who are looking for jobs, and they say the first thing recruiters ask them is, what tool do you use? They don't ask, what's your quality of thought? What's your framework? What's your approach? And so much of what we consider design and our methods for evaluating design, especially for digital products and services, are based in graphic and industrial design, and they're based on a surface that doesn't really apply anymore. If good design is what best meets that goal, what's good design? You take a look at something like Craigslist. Craigslist has been around for 20 years. As a digital product, it's so enduring and so fantastic, but a graphic designer would say it's not very good. Say that Wikipedia has a very, very similar look to it. It's very simple, but this is the perfect design for very rapid updating of information. So you have to ask, what creates that enduring value? You look at Airbnb. I love Airbnb. I've stayed with them. And they use visual design to help create trust between people. And they're famous for having their designer founders. But recently in San Francisco, they put up these billboards chiding the city for perhaps not spending the tax money that they'd gotten from Airbnb well. And so this calls into question, they have that surface design, but do they have that deep framework in pursuing that idea of community? Design problems are philosophical problems. So the practice of philosophy changes as we gain new knowledge, and the practice of design changes with technology. In the 70s, there's an American philosopher, Robert Nozick, who came up with the idea of the experience machine. He said, if some psychologists hook you up to a machine and could totally simulate an experience, and you could have any pleasurable experience you wanted, would that be good? And if having a pleasant time is the highest experience, maybe that would be. But he argued that people wouldn't want to plug into this machine because they have other values. Well, we come to the present, and it turns out we didn't need demonic psychologists to invent this machine for us. Apple did. And we don't have to do a thought experiment anymore, because we see how compelling we're pulled into this not entirely but somewhat synthesized world. And thanks to digital technology, the space between thought and artifact has collapsed. And this means it's even more important as designers to make conscious, intentional choices. There's less and less friction from idea to action. And is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? That's a judgment we have to make based on our values. For over 1 billion people, Facebook is an intermediary in our most intimate relationships. And with their real name policy, they're actually taking a strong philosophical statement about authentic identity. And it comes from a good place. It comes from a place of safety. But the truth is, out in the world, there are people for whom they would be made less safe by using their real names online, and who actually have an identity that they consider more authentic than what's on their bill or their driver's license. Going forward. There we go. Digital design is changing the nature. Too much. Digital design is changing digital design is messing my world up right now. It's changing the nature of our human relationships. It's changing dating and finance, and even dealing with our relatives and our children and education and knowledge. And so, we're not dealing with physical objects anymore. We're dealing with pure ideas. And as designers, our material is ideas. And we forget this because we cloak these ideas in metaphors. So we have the illusion of buttons and the illusion of pages and the illusion of folders or photo albums. The object permanence part of our brain tricks us into thinking that our browser tabs are just 5,000 infinitely thin slices of paper. But what we're dealing with are pure ideas. And the best tool to work with ideas is the question. The designer's most important tool is the question. And the fantastic thing about deciding to be a philosopher as well as a designer is that you can create this path. You can create these questions, but you have to move your definition of design a little bit. We have to move the way we think about design and designers from thinking about the how to thinking about the why. And the how is very, very comfortable. We can master the how. But the why is something we have to continually ask. We can never stop asking the why. It's a scary journey into the unknown. And that's the most exciting part of design. Thank you.